The harsh fluorescent lights of Pinnacle Industries' bustling office flickered to life as Jacob Miller, a modest 28-year-old data entry clerk, hurried through the glass doors. His worn shoes squeaked against the polished marble floor, drawing disapproving glances from his impeccably dressed colleagues. Jacob's ill-fitting suit, a hand-me-down from his late father, hung loosely on his thin frame as he made his way to his cramped cubicle in the far corner of the expansive room. As he settled into his chair, Jacob's eyes inadvertently wandered to the framed photo on his desk, a bittersweet reminder of happier times. In it, his parents smiled back at him, their eyes twinkling with pride and love. A lump formed in his throat as he recalled the tragic car accident that had claimed their lives just 2 years ago, leaving him alone in the world with nothing but crushing debt and a broken heart. Miller! The sharp voice of Ethan Blackwood, Jacob's immediate superior, cut through the air like a knife. In my office. Now. Jacob's heart sank as he rose from his chair, keenly aware of the curious stares from his coworkers. He made his way to Ethan's opulent corner office, its glass walls offering no privacy from the prying eyes of the entire floor. Ethan Blackwood, a man in his early 40s with slicked back hair and a perpetual sneer, leaned back in his leather chair as Jacob entered. "Close the door," he commanded, his voice dripping with disdain. As Jacob complied, Ethan's steely gaze bore into him. "Do you know why I called you in here, Miller?" Jacob swallowed hard, his mind racing through possibilities. "And no, sir," he stammered. Ethan's lips curled into a cruel smile. "It seems you've made quite a mess of things, haven't you?" He tossed a stack of papers onto his desk. "These reports are riddled with errors. It's an embarrassment to the entire department." Jacob's face flushed with shame. He had been working late into the night, trying to keep up with the increasingly unrealistic deadlines Ethan had been imposing. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll fix them right away." "Oh, you'll do more than that," Ethan sneered. He stood up, towering over Jacob. "You'll redo every single report from the past month. And you'll do it without pay." Jacob's eyes widened in disbelief. "But sir, I can't afford to dash." "Can't afford to?" Ethan interrupted, his voice rising. "Perhaps you should have thought of that before wasting company time and resources with your incompetence." The office had fallen silent, all eyes on the unfolding drama. Jacob felt his chest tighten, the weight of humiliation crushing down on him. "Please, Mr. Blackwood," Jacob pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need this job. My parents' medical bills dash." "Your sob story doesn't interest me, Miller," Ethan spat. "Either you do as I say, or you can clean out your desk right now." Tears pricked at the corners of Jacob's eyes, but he blinked them back, determined not to give Ethan the satisfaction of seeing him break. "Yes, sir," he said quietly, his shoulders slumping in defeat. As Jacob turned to leave, Ethan's voice stopped him. "Oh, and Miller? I expect you to stay late every night until this mess is sorted out. No excuses." Jacob nodded mutely and left the office, the weight of despair settling over him like a heavy blanket. As he made his way back to his cubicle, he could hear the whispers and snickers of his colleagues. His cheeks burned with shame, but he kept his head held high, refusing to let them see how deeply Ethan's words had cut him. Across the room, a pair of kind eyes watched the scene unfold with growing concern. Olivia Martinez, the new HR manager, had witnessed the entire exchange. Her heart went out to Jacob, recognizing the quiet dignity with which he bore his humiliation. She made a mental note to keep a closer eye on the situation, sensing that there was more to this story than met the eye. As Jacob settled back into his chair, his mind whirled with worry. How would he pay his rent? How could he possibly keep up with his parents' mounting medical bills? The weight of his responsibilities threatened to crush him, but he took a deep breath, reminding himself of his father's words, "Son, no matter how hard life gets, never lose your kindness. It's the one thing no one can take from you." With trembling hands, Jacob reached for the stack of reports on his desk. He would not let Ethan break him. He would prove his worth, not just to his cruel boss, but to himself. As he began to work, a small flame of determination flickered to life in his heart. Little did Jacob know that this day of humiliation would set in motion a chain of events that would change not only his life but the lives of everyone at Pinnacle Industries. Across town, in a dimly lit office, a figure hunched over a computer screen, fingers flying across the keyboard. Amanda Reeves, an investigative journalist for the New York Sentinel, had just received an anonymous tip about suspicious activities at Pinnacle Industries. Her eyes narrowed as she scrolled through the information, a mixture of shock and excitement coursing through her veins. "Blackwood, you slimy bastard," she muttered, a predatory smile spreading across her face. "I've got you now." As the sun set over the New York skyline, casting long shadows across the Pinnacle Industries office, Jacob continued to work tirelessly, unaware that the tides of fortune were about to turn. The stage was set for a drama that would rock the corporate world to its core, with Jacob unwittingly at its center. Meanwhile, in the penthouse suite of a luxury apartment building, Ethan Blackwood poured himself a glass of expensive scotch, savoring his perceived victory over Jacob. He smirked as he looked out over the glittering city lights, feeling invincible. But fate had other plans, and the karmic wheels were already in motion. As night fell, three very different individuals, Jacob, Olivia, and Amanda, each played their part in a story that was about to unfold. A tale of cruelty, compassion, and justice that would leave the entire city talking for years to come. Little did anyone know that the humble data entry clerk, so cruelly humiliated that day, would soon become the catalyst for a revolution that would shake Pinnacle Industries to its very foundations. For in the world of corporate intrigue and human drama, it's often the quietest voices that end up roaring the loudest. The next morning dawned bright and clear, but for Jacob Miller, it felt as though a dark cloud hung over his head. He arrived at the office even earlier than usual, determined to make headway on the mountain of reports Ethan had dumped on him. As he walked through the quiet office, he noticed a flyer pinned to the bulletin board announcing the annual Pinnacle Industries Charity Gala. Jacob sighed, knowing he could never afford a ticket to such an event. It was just another reminder of the vast chasm that separated him from his more affluent colleagues. Still, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of longing. His parents had always taught him the importance of giving back, even when you had little to give. As he settled into his cubicle, a gentle voice startled him. "Good morning, Jacob." He looked up to see Olivia Martinez, the HR manager, standing by his desk with a sympathetic smile. Jacob felt his cheeks flush, remembering yesterday's humiliation. "Good morning, Ms. Martinez," he replied softly, averting his eyes. Olivia's brow furrowed with concern. "I couldn't help but overhear what happened yesterday," she said, her voice low. "Are you all right?" Jacob's first instinct was to brush off her concern, to protect what little dignity he had left. But something in Olivia's kind eyes made him pause. "I'll be okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's just been tough since my parents passed away. But I'm grateful to have a job." Olivia's heart ached at the quiet resignation in Jacob's voice. "Jacob, what Mr. Blackwood did wasn't right. If you'd like to file a formal complaint No. Jacob interjected, panic flashing in his eyes. "Please, I can't risk losing this job. I'll just work harder, do better. It'll be fine." Olivia wanted to argue, to tell him that he deserved better treatment, but she could see the fear in his eyes. Instead, she nodded slowly. "All right, Jacob. But please know that my door is always open if you need to talk." As Olivia walked away, Jacob felt a mix of gratitude and shame. He appreciated her kindness but hated feeling like a charity case. With a heavy sigh, he turned back to his computer, determined to prove his worth. Across the office, Ethan Blackwood swaggered in, his expensive suit impeccably pressed. He shot a smug glance at Jacob's cubicle before disappearing into his office. The day wore on, with Jacob working through his lunch break, his stomach growling in protest. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the office, Jacob's concentration was broken by a commotion near the elevators. He looked up to see a striking woman with fiery red hair striding purposefully towards Ethan's office, flanked by two serious-looking men in suits. The woman, Amanda Reeves, didn't bother knocking. She burst into Ethan's office, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent workspace. "Ethan Blackwood, I'm Amanda Reeves from the New York Sentinel. Care to comment on the allegations of embezzlement and worker exploitation at Pinnacle Industries?" A collective gasp rippled through the office. Jacob's eyes widened in shock, his heart pounding in his chest. He watched as Ethan's face drained of color, his usual arrogance replaced by barely concealed panic. I don't know what you're talking about," Ethan stammered, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "This is a private office. You can't just barge in here." Amanda's lips curved into a predatory smile. "Oh, but I can when I have evidence of your criminal activities." She turned to address the stunned onlookers. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Blackwood here has been siphoning money from your pension funds and manipulating company finances for years. And that's just the tip of the iceberg." The office erupted into chaos. Employees began shouting questions, some in anger, others in fear. Security guards rushed towards Amanda, but the men accompanying her flashed FBI badges, stopping them in their tracks. In the midst of the pandemonium, Jacob sat frozen, his mind reeling. Could it be true? Had Ethan really been stealing from them all this time? As he watched Ethan being led away in handcuffs, a strange mix of emotions washed over him: shock, vindication, and an odd sense of pity for the man who had caused him so much pain. Olivia appeared by Jacob's side, her face a mask of disbelief. "Jacob," she said urgently, "I need your help. You work with the financial data, right? We need to go through everything, find out how deep this goes." Jacob nodded, a surge of determination replacing his initial shock. "Of course, Ms. Martinez. I'll do whatever I can to help." As they hurried towards the conference room, Jacob couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this was his chance to prove his worth, to show that he was more than just a lowly data entry clerk. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Jacob found himself working alongside Olivia and a team of FBI forensic accountants, his intimate knowledge of the company's data proving invaluable. As they delved deeper into the financial records, the full extent of Ethan's crimes began to emerge. It wasn't just embezzlement. Ethan had been systematically exploiting workers, particularly those in vulnerable positions like Jacob. He had been doctoring performance reports, denying promotions and raises to those who deserved them, all while lining his own pockets. As the night wore on, Jacob's expertise shone through. His meticulous attention to detail and deep understanding of the company's systems helped uncover layers of fraud that even the FBI had missed. Olivia watched him with growing admiration, realizing that this humble man possessed a brilliant mind that had been overlooked for far too long. Around midnight, Amanda Reeves approached Jacob, her eyes gleaming with journalistic fervor. "Mr. Miller," she said, "your insights have been invaluable. Would you be willing to go on record about your experiences working under Ethan Blackwood?" Jacob hesitated, years of keeping his head down warring with a newfound sense of purpose. He glanced at Olivia, who gave him an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, Jacob squared his shoulders. "Yes," he said, his voice stronger than he ever remembered it being. I think it's time the truth came out. As Jacob began to speak, recounting years of mistreatment and subtle abuses, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. With each word, he grew more confident, his quiet dignity shining through as he described the struggles he and his co-workers had endured. Amanda listened intently, her respect for this unassuming man growing with every revelation. She realized that in Jacob Miller, she had found not just a source, but the heart of her story, a tale of resilience in the face of corporate cruelty. As the first rays of dawn began to peek through the windows, Jacob finally finished his account. The office was quiet, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Olivia approached him, tears glistening in her eyes. "Jacob," she said softly, "I had no idea. I'm so sorry for what you've been through. But I want you to know that things are going to change around here. Starting with you." Jacob looked at her, confusion evident on his face. "What do you mean?" Olivia smiled, a mix of admiration and determination in her eyes. "Jacob, you've just helped uncover one of the biggest corporate scandals in recent history. Your knowledge and integrity are exactly what this company needs to rebuild. I'm recommending you for a promotion to head of our new ethics and compliance department." Jacob's jaw dropped, his mind struggling to process this sudden turn of events. "But I'm just a data entry clerk," he stammered. Amanda chimed in, a knowing smile on her face. "Not anymore, Mr. Miller. You're about to become the face of corporate reform. Your story, your resilience, it's going to inspire people across the country." As the reality of the situation began to sink in, Jacob felt a surge of emotions, gratitude, disbelief, and a newfound sense of purpose. He thought of his parents, of how proud they would be to see him standing up for what was right. The office began to stir as early morning workers arrived, whispers and shocked exclamations filling the air as news of the night's events spread. Jacob stood tall, no longer the downtrodden clerk but a man coming into his own power. As he looked out over the awakening city, Jacob realized that this was more than just a personal victory. It was a chance to make a real difference, to ensure that no one else would have to endure what he had. With a deep breath, he turned to Olivia and Amanda. "All right," he said, a quiet determination in his voice. "Let's change things for the better." Little did Jacob know that this was just the beginning of a journey that would not only transform Pinnacle Industries but would ripple through the corporate world, challenging the very foundations of power and privilege. The humble data entry clerk was about to become a beacon of hope for workers everywhere, proving that integrity and kindness could triumph over greed and cruelty. As the sun rose over New York City, casting a golden glow over the Pinnacle Industries building, a new day dawned, not just for Jacob Miller, but for every unsung hero in every office across the country. The stage was set for a revolution, with the most unlikely of leaders at its helm. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity at Pinnacle Industries. The once bustling office had transformed into a hive of investigators, journalists, and anxious employees. At the center of it all stood Jacob Miller, the unassuming data entry clerk turned whistleblower and unexpected hero. As Jacob settled into his new role as head of the Ethics and Compliance Department, he found himself thrust into a world he had never imagined. Gone were the days of hiding in his cramped cubicle. Now, he had a spacious office with a view of the city's skyline. The ill-fitting suit that had once been a source of embarrassment was replaced by a tailored ensemble, a gift from a grateful board of directors eager to showcase their commitment to change. But for Jacob, the trappings of success paled in comparison to the opportunity to make a real difference. He threw himself into his work with a passion that surprised even himself, determined to root out every last vestige of corruption within the company. One morning, as Jacob pored over a stack of financial reports, a soft knock on his door drew his attention. He looked up to see Olivia Martinez, a warm smile on her face. "Good morning, Jacob," she said, stepping into the office. "How are you holding up?" Jacob ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that betrayed his lingering discomfort with his new position. "It's overwhelming," he admitted. "But in a good way, I think. There's so much to do, so many people counting on us to get this right." Olivia nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "That's why I'm here, actually. The board wants to talk to you about the upcoming charity gala. They think it would be a perfect opportunity to unveil our new corporate ethics initiative." Jacob's eyes widened. The charity gala, once a symbol of the vast gulf between himself and the company elite, now loomed as a daunting challenge. "Me?" he stammered. "Speak at the gala?" "Olivia, I don't know if I'm ready for that." Olivia's smile softened. "Jacob, you're more ready than you know. Your story, your integrity, it's exactly what people need to hear right now. You've already changed so much here. Imagine what you could do on an even bigger stage." As Jacob pondered her words, a commotion outside his office caught their attention. They stepped out to find a crowd gathered around the elevator, murmurs of shock and disbelief rippling through the assembled employees. Through the parting crowd strode Ethan Blackwood, his once immaculate appearance now disheveled, his eyes darting nervously. Flanked by two stern-faced lawyers, Ethan made his way towards Jacob's office. The entire floor fell silent as Ethan approached Jacob, the tension palpable. For a moment, the two men stood face to face, the disgraced executive and the humble clerk who had brought him down. Ethan's voice was a hoarse whisper, a far cry from his once booming confidence. "Miller," he said, his eyes unable to meet Jacob's steady gaze. I need to talk to you. Privately." Jacob hesitated, memories of past humiliations flashing through his mind. But as he looked at Ethan, really looked at him, he saw not the towering figure of authority that had once terrorized him, but a broken man grasping at straws. With a small nod, Jacob gestured to his office. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood. Please, come in." As the door closed behind them, the office erupted into a frenzy of speculation. Olivia found herself fending off curious inquiries, her own mind racing with possibilities. Inside the office, Ethan slumped into a chair, the weight of his actions visibly crushing him. "Miller." "Jacob," he began, his voice cracking. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you. But I need your help." Jacob leaned against his desk, arms crossed, his face a mask of careful neutrality. "What kind of help, Mr. Blackwood?" Ethan's eyes, once cold and calculating, now brimmed with desperate tears. "They're going to take everything," he whispered. "The house, the cars, my family's savings, all of it. I know I deserve it, but my daughter. She's in college, and without that money, she'll have to drop out. Please, Jacob. I'm begging you. Is there anything you can do?" The office fell silent, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Jacob stared at Ethan, a tumult of emotions warring within him. This was the man who had humiliated him, who had made his life a living hell. Every instinct screamed at him to turn Ethan away, to let him face the full consequences of his actions. But as Jacob looked at the broken man before him, he remembered his father's words, "Son, true strength isn't about making others feel small. It's about having the courage to be kind, even to those who don't deserve it." With a deep breath, Jacob made his decision. "Mr. Blackwood," he said softly, "I can't undo what's been done. The law must take its course. But..." He paused, weighing his words carefully. "I'll speak to the board about setting up a scholarship fund for the children of all Pinnacle employees. Including yours." Ethan's head snapped up, disbelief etched across his face. You would do that? For me? After everything I've done?" Jacob's voice was firm but not unkind. "Not for you, Mr. Blackwood. For your daughter. For all the families who have suffered because of the choices made in this company. This is about making things right, not just punishing the guilty. Tears streamed down Ethan's face as the full impact of Jacob's words hit him. In that moment, the last vestiges of his arrogance crumbled, replaced by a profound sense of shame and, unexpectedly, gratitude. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. I don't deserve your kindness." Jacob nodded, a sad smile touching his lips. "Perhaps not. But that's not for me to judge. All I know is that continuing the cycle of cruelty won't heal the wounds this company has suffered. It's time for a new way forward." As Ethan rose to leave, visibly shaken by the encounter, Jacob added, "Mr. Blackwood, I hope you'll use this as an opportunity to reflect, to change. It's never too late to choose a different path." Ethan paused at the door, turning to look at Jacob one last time. In his eyes, Jacob saw a glimmer of something he had never seen before: respect. With a small nod, Ethan left, the door closing softly behind him. As soon as Ethan was gone, Jacob sank into his chair, the weight of the encounter hitting him all at once. He closed his eyes, taking deep breaths to steady himself. A gentle knock on the door roused him. Olivia entered, her face a mask of concern. "Jacob? Are you all right? What happened?" Jacob looked up at her, a mix of emotions swirling in his eyes. I think I just learned what it truly means to lead with compassion." Olivia sat across from him, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" As Jacob recounted his conversation with Ethan, Olivia's expression shifted from concern to awe. When he finished, she shook her head in disbelief. "Jacob, do you realize what you've done? You didn't just show mercy, you've set an example for the entire company. This changes everything." Jacob smiled ruefully. "I'm not sure I did anything special, Olivia. I just did what felt right." Olivia reached across the desk, squeezing his hand. "That's exactly what makes it special, Jacob. In a world where it's so easy to choose revenge, you chose kindness. That's the kind of leadership pinnacle and the world needs right now." As they sat there, the gravity of the moment settling over them, a knock on the door interrupted their contemplation. Amanda Reeves, the investigative journalist, poked her head in, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, barely containing her enthusiasm, "but you're going to want to see this." She strode into the office, placing a tablet on Jacob's desk. "The story just broke. It's everywhere." Jacob and Olivia leaned in, their eyes widening as they took in the headlines splashed across the screen. "Pinnacle's Paragon, humble hero rises from mailroom to boardroom." From victim to victor, Jacob Miller's journey shakes corporate America. A new era of ethics, how one man's integrity exposed a billion-dollar scandal. As they scrolled through the articles, reading snippets of Jacob's story, his humble beginnings, the hardships he'd endured, and his unexpected rise to prominence, the full impact of the past weeks began to sink in. Amanda's voice cut through their stunned silence. "Jacob, this is huge. You're not just a local story anymore. People across the country are talking about you, about what you represent. You're becoming a symbol of hope for working-class people everywhere." Jacob sat back in his chair, overwhelmed. I never wanted to be a symbol," he said softly. "I just wanted to do the right thing." Olivia squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. "Sometimes, Jacob, doing the right thing is exactly what the world needs to see. You've given people hope that integrity and kindness can still triumph in the corporate world." As the reality of his new situation washed over him, Jacob felt a mix of trepidation and determination. He thought of all the people who had suffered under corrupt leadership, all the voices that had been silenced by greed and intimidation. If his story could give them courage, if his actions could pave the way for real change, then perhaps this unexpected spotlight was a responsibility he needed to embrace. Looking up at Olivia and Amanda, Jacob took a deep breath. "All right," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "If this is the platform I've been given, then I'm going to use it. Not just for Pinnacle, but for every worker who's ever felt powerless or exploited. It's time for a real change in corporate culture, and if I can help make that happen, then that's exactly what I'll do." Olivia beamed at him, pride shining in her eyes. "That's the Jacob Miller I knew was in there all along. So, does this mean you're ready to speak at the gala?" Jacob stood up, squaring his shoulders. "More than ready. It's time to show the world what true leadership looks like." As they began to discuss plans for the gala, none of them could have anticipated the chain of events that Jacob's decision would set in motion. The humble data entry clerk was about to step onto a national stage, armed with nothing but his integrity and his unwavering commitment to doing what was right. Little did they know that across town, in the opulent offices of a rival corporation, eyes were watching Jacob's rise with growing interest and mounting concern. For in the cutthroat world of high finance, a man with Jacob's principles was not just an anomaly, he was a threat. As the sun began to set over New York City, casting long shadows across the Pinnacle Industries building, the stage was being set for a confrontation that would test Jacob's resolve to its very limits. The real battle, it seemed, was only just beginning. As Jacob, Olivia, and Amanda continued their discussion about the upcoming gala, a sharp knock on the door interrupted them. A young intern, looking flustered, poked her head into the office. "Mr. Miller," she said breathlessly, "there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent." Jacob exchanged puzzled glances with Olivia and Amanda. "Did she give a name?" The intern nodded, her eyes wide. "She says her name is Sarah Blackwood. She's Ethan Blackwood's daughter." A hush fell over the room. Jacob felt his heart rate quicken, memories of his recent encounter with Ethan flashing through his mind. With a deep breath, he nodded to the intern. "Send her in, please." Moments later, a young woman with long dark hair and Ethan's piercing blue eyes stepped into the office. Sarah Blackwood carried herself with a mixture of defiance and vulnerability, her chin held high even as her hands twisted nervously in front of her. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice quavering slightly, "I'm sorry to barge in like this, but I needed to see you." Jacob gestured for her to take a seat, acutely aware of Olivia and Amanda's watchful gazes. "It's all right, Miss Blackwood. How can I help you?" Sarah sank into the chair, her composure cracking slightly. I heard what you did for my father. About the scholarship fund." She paused, swallowing hard. "I wanted to thank you, but also, I need to understand. Why? After everything he did to you, why would you help him?" "Help me?" Jacob leaned forward, his eyes filled with compassion. "Sarah, may I call you Sarah?" She nodded, and he continued, "What your father did was wrong, and he's facing the consequences of his actions. But you're not responsible for his mistakes. You shouldn't have to pay for them." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "But I've benefited from them, haven't I? All those years, living in luxury, never wanting for anything. It was all built on lies and theft." Jacob's voice was gentle but firm. "And now you know the truth. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge?" Sarah looked up, confusion etched across her face. "What do you mean?" "You have a choice now," Jacob explained. "You can let the shame and guilt of your father's actions define you, or you can use this as an opportunity to forge your own path. To do better." A spark of determination flickered in Sarah's eyes. "I want to make things right," she said softly. "I don't know how, but I want to try." Jacob smiled, an idea forming in his mind. "How would you like to help us set up that scholarship fund? Your insight could be invaluable in ensuring it reaches those who need it most." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. You'd trust me with that? After everything?" Olivia stepped forward, her voice warm. "Sarah, part of changing the culture here at Pinnacle is about giving people second chances. About believing in the possibility of redemption." Amanda, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "And it would make one hell of a story. The daughter of the disgraced executive working to right her father's wrongs? That's the kind of narrative that could inspire real change in corporate America." Sarah looked from one face to another, a mix of emotions playing across her features. Finally, she straightened her shoulders, a look of resolve settling over her. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "Whatever it takes, I want to be part of making things right." As Sarah left the office, a new sense of purpose in her step, Jacob couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, he thought, this was the true path to healing, not just punishing the guilty, but creating opportunities for redemption and growth. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations for the gala. Jacob found himself thrust into a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and planning sessions. As the event drew nearer, he felt the weight of expectation settling heavily on his shoulders. One evening, as Jacob was working late in his office, a familiar figure appeared in his doorway. Olivia leaned against the frame, concern etched across her face. "Jacob," she said softly, "when was the last time you took a break?" He looked up, blinking owlishly behind his glasses. I'm not sure," he admitted. "There's just so much to do, and the gala's only a few days away." Olivia crossed the room, gently closing his laptop. "Come on," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "You need some fresh air. And I know just the place." Before Jacob could protest, he found himself being led out of the building and into the warm evening air. They walked in comfortable silence, the bustling streets of New York gradually giving way to quieter neighborhoods. Finally, they arrived at a small, unassuming park tucked away between towering apartment buildings. Olivia led Jacob to a bench overlooking a modest pond where a family of ducks was settling in for the night. As they sat, Jacob felt some of the tension begin to leave his body. He took a deep breath, savoring the relative quiet of the park. "My parents used to bring me here," Olivia said softly, her eyes fixed on the gently rippling water. "Whenever things got tough, whenever the world seemed too big and scary, they'd bring me here to remind me of the simple things." Jacob turned to look at her, seeing a vulnerability in her eyes that she rarely showed at work. "It's beautiful," he said sincerely. "Thank you for sharing it with me." Olivia smiled, then turned to face him fully. "Jacob, I know these past few weeks have been overwhelming. You've been thrust into a spotlight you never asked for. I want to make sure you're okay. Really okay." Jacob was silent for a long moment, considering her words. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm scared, Olivia," he admitted. "Terrified, actually. What if I'm not cut out for this? What if I let everyone down?" Olivia reached out, gently taking his hand in hers. "Jacob, look at me," she said firmly. When he met her gaze, she continued, "You haven't let anyone down. You've already done more good than you know. And you want to know a secret?" She leaned in conspiratorially. "Everyone's scared. The ones who say they're not are usually the ones you need to watch out for." A small chuckle escaped Jacob's lips, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. How do you always know exactly what to say? Olivia's eyes twinkled with mischief. It's a gift. And also years of HR training. They both laughed, the sound echoing softly across the pond. As their laughter faded, a comfortable silence settled between them. Jacob found himself acutely aware of Olivia's hand still holding his, of the warmth of her presence beside him. Olivia, he began hesitantly, I don't know what I'd do without you. These past few weeks, you've been my rock. My compass. Olivia's breath caught in her throat, her eyes searching his face. Jacob, But before she could finish her thought, a shrill ringing cut through the quiet of the park. Jacob fumbled for his phone, his face falling as he saw the caller ID. It's Amanda, he said apologetically. I should take this. Olivia nodded, gently withdrawing her hand. As Jacob answered the call, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of disappointment. The moment, whatever it had been, had passed. Jacob, Amanda's voice crackled through the speaker, urgency clear in her tone, we've got a problem. A big one. Jacob straightened, immediately on alert. What's wrong? I just got a tip from one of my sources, Amanda explained rapidly. Apex Corporation is planning a hostile takeover of Pinnacle. They're using the scandal as leverage, trying to buy up shares while the price is depressed. Jacob's mind raced, the implications hitting him like a freight train. Apex Corporation was known for its cutthroat business practices and disregard for worker rights. If they took over Pinnacle, all the progress they'd made, all the reforms they were planning, it would all be for nothing. What can we do? Jacob asked, his voice tight with tension. Amanda's response was grim. We need to move fast. The gala might be our only chance to rally support, to show investors and the public that Pinnacle is worth saving. But, Jacob, Apex isn't going to play fair. They're going to come after you, try to discredit you. Are you ready for that? Jacob closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. When he opened them again, there was a steely determination in his gaze. I have to be, he said firmly. Too many people are counting on us. We can't let Apex win. As he ended the call, Jacob turned to Olivia, who had been listening with growing concern. We need to get back to the office, he said, already rising from the bench. We've got work to do. Olivia nodded, falling into step beside him as they hurried out of the park. As they walked, she reached out, gently squeezing his arm. Whatever happens, Jacob, you're not in this alone. We're all behind you. Jacob managed a small smile, grateful for her unwavering support. As they made their way back to Pinnacle Industries, the New York skyline looming before them, Jacob felt a mix of fear and determination coursing through him. The stakes had just been raised, and he knew that the real battle was only beginning. Little did he know that across town, in the opulent boardroom of Apex Corporation, a group of executives was gathered around a table, poring over documents and strategizing. At the head of the table sat Maxwell Sterling, CEO of Apex, his cold eyes fixed on a photograph of Jacob Miller. This nobody thinks he can change the game, Sterling sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. It's time we showed him how the real world works. By the time we're done, Jacob Miller will wish he'd never left his little cubicle. As the executives laughed, a chill seemed to settle over the room. The stage was set for a showdown that would not only determine the fate of Pinnacle Industries but could potentially reshape the landscape of corporate America. Back at Pinnacle, Jacob and Olivia burst into the office, finding Amanda already there, surrounded by a flurry of papers and open laptops. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity as they reached out to board members, drafted statements, and strategized how to counter Apex's move. As dawn broke over the city, Jacob stood at the window of his office, watching the first rays of sunlight paint the sky. He felt the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders, but also a fierce determination. He thought of all the employees counting on him, of Sarah Blackwood's desire for redemption, of Olivia's unwavering support. Turning back to the room, where Olivia and Amanda were still working tirelessly, Jacob cleared his throat. "We're not just fighting for Pinnacle," he said, his voice strong and clear. "We're fighting for every worker who's ever felt powerless against corporate greed. We're fighting for a future where integrity and compassion matter more than profit margins." Olivia looked up, a proud smile on her face. "Now that," she said, "sounds like a speech worthy of the gala." As they shared a moment of quiet determination, none of them could have anticipated the challenges that lay ahead. The battle for Pinnacle's soul was about to begin in earnest, and Jacob Miller, the once invisible data entry clerk, was now at the very heart of the storm. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. The news of Apex's attempted takeover had leaked to the press, turning what was supposed to be a simple charity gala into the focal point of a high-stakes corporate drama. Jacob found himself at the center of a media frenzy, his face splashed across newspapers and TV screens, his story dissected and analyzed by pundits and business experts. Through it all, Jacob clung to his principles, refusing to be drawn into mudslinging or underhanded tactics. When Apex's PR team tried to paint him as an opportunist looking for his 15 minutes of fame, Jacob responded with grace and honesty, his sincerity shining through in every interview. The night before the gala, Jacob found himself once again working late in his office. As he pored over his speech for the 100th time, a soft knock on the door drew his attention. He looked up to see Sarah Blackwood standing in the doorway, a hesitant smile on her face. "Mr. Miller," she said, "I hope I'm not interrupting." Jacob gestured for her to come in. "Not at all, Sarah. And please, call me Jacob. How can I help you?" Sarah took a seat across from him, her posture straight but her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. "I wanted to talk to you about tomorrow night," she began. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about forging my own path." Jacob leaned forward, giving her his full attention. "And what have you decided?" Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I want to speak at the gala," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I want to tell my story, to show people that change is possible, that we can learn from our mistakes and do better." Jacob felt a swell of pride at the young woman's courage. "Sarah, that's incredibly brave of you. Are you sure you're ready for this?" "It won't be easy." Sarah nodded, a determined glint in her eye. "I'm sure. I've spent too long hiding from the truth, benefiting from my father's crimes without questioning them. It's time I took responsibility and did something good with the platform I've been given." As Jacob looked at Sarah, he saw not just Ethan Blackwood's daughter, but a symbol of the change they were fighting for, the possibility of redemption, of growth, of choosing to do better even when it's difficult. "All right," he said with a smile. "Let's work your speech into the program. I think your voice is exactly what people need to hear right now." As Sarah left the office, her step lighter and more confident, Jacob felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow night wasn't just about saving Pinnacle from Apex's takeover, it was about setting an example for a new kind of corporate culture, one built on transparency, accountability, and second chances. Little did Jacob know that across town, in a dimly lit hotel room, Maxwell Sterling was putting the finishing touches on his own plans for the gala. The Apex CEO's eyes glittered with malice as he looked over a dossier filled with carefully cultivated dirt on Jacob Miller. "Enjoy your moment in the spotlight while you can, Mr. Miller," Sterling muttered to himself. "By this time tomorrow, you'll wish you'd never set foot outside your cubicle." As the city slept, the stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of Pinnacle Industries, but potentially the future of corporate America itself. And at the center of it all stood Jacob Miller, the humble data entry clerk who had become an unlikely champion for workers everywhere. The dawn of the gala day broke over New York City, painting the skyline in hues of gold and pink. For Jacob, it marked the beginning of the most important day of his life. As he stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his new suit, a gift from the board of directors, he barely recognized the man staring back at him. Gone was the timid clerk who used to shrink from confrontation. In his place stood a man with purpose, his eyes clear and determined. Yet as he smoothed down his lapels, Jacob felt a familiar flutter of anxiety in his stomach. So much was riding on tonight. Could he really live up to everyone's expectations? A gentle knock on his apartment door pulled him from his thoughts. He opened it to find Olivia standing there, looking radiant in an elegant evening gown. "I thought you might need a pep talk," she said with a warm smile. "And maybe some breakfast. You look like you haven't eaten in days." Jacob chuckled, feeling some of the tension leave his shoulders as he invited her in. As they shared a simple breakfast of coffee and bagels, Olivia's presence worked its usual magic, calming his nerves and bolstering his confidence. "You know," Olivia said as she sipped her coffee, "when I first met you, I never imagined we'd be here. But looking at you now, I can't imagine anyone better suited for this moment." Jacob felt a warmth spread through his chest at her words. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Olivia. You've been my rock through all of this." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken emotions. But before either could speak, Jacob's phone buzzed insistently, breaking the spell. "It's Amanda," he said, glancing at the screen. "She says we need to get to Pinnacle right away." "Something about a last-minute press conference?" Olivia nodded, her professional demeanor sliding back into place. "Let's go. Whatever Apex is planning, we'll face it together." As they rushed to Pinnacle Industries, the streets of New York were already buzzing with anticipation. News vans lined the sidewalks, reporters jostling for position. Jacob and Olivia slipped in through a side entrance, immediately engulfed by a flurry of activity. Amanda met them in the lobby, her face tight with worry. Apex just announced a press conference for noon. "Word is, they're going to make their takeover bid public, and they're bringing out the big guns to discredit you, Jacob." Jacob felt his stomach clench, but he squared his shoulders. "Then we'll just have to beat them to the punch. Can we set up our own conference before theirs?" Amanda's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. I'll make it happen. But Jacob, are you sure you're ready for this? Once we go public, there's no turning back." Jacob looked at Olivia, drawing strength from her encouraging nod. "I'm ready. It's time to show the world what Pinnacle really stands for." The next few hours were a whirlwind of preparation. As the communications team scrambled to set up the press conference, Jacob huddled with Olivia, Amanda, and key board members, refining their strategy. At 11:30 a.m. sharp, Jacob stepped up to the podium in Pinnacle's main atrium, cameras flashing and reporters leaning forward eagerly. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on such short notice. I stand before you not just as an employee of Pinnacle Industries, but as someone who believes in the power of integrity, compassion, and second chances." As Jacob spoke, his voice growing stronger with each word, he could see the reporters hanging on his every word. He outlined Pinnacle's new ethical initiatives, the scholarship program, and their commitment to fair labor practices. "We are aware of Apex Corporation's intention to acquire Pinnacle," Jacob continued, his voice steady. "But I'm here to tell you that Pinnacle is not for sale. Not its assets, and certainly not its soul." Just then, a commotion at the back of the room caught everyone's attention. Maxwell Sterling, CEO of Apex, strode in, flanked by his entourage. His face was a mask of barely contained fury. "This is preposterous," Sterling bellowed, pushing his way to the front. "Miller, you're nothing but a fraud. I have proof that you've been manipulating company records, that this whole whistleblower act is just a ploy for power." A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned to Jacob. This was the moment of truth. Jacob felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back, but his voice remained calm as he addressed Sterling directly. "Mr. Sterling, I've never manipulated a single record in my life. But I welcome any investigation into my actions or Pinnacle's records." In fact, Jacob paused, his next words careful and deliberate. "I call for an independent audit of both Pinnacle and Apex. Let's see which company truly has nothing to hide." Sterling's face paled, his bluster faltering. It was clear he hadn't expected this level of transparency. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the crowd. "I can vouch for Mr. Miller's integrity." Sarah Blackwood stepped forward, her head held high. "My father's actions brought this company to its knees, but Jacob Miller's honesty and compassion are what's bringing it back to life. If Pinnacle is the future of ethical business, then Apex is everything we should leave behind." The room erupted in a frenzy of flashing cameras and shouted questions. As Sterling sputtered and retreated, Jacob felt a hand slip into his. He turned to see Olivia beside him, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." As the day wore on and the story spread like wildfire across news outlets and social media, it became clear that the tide had turned. Apex's takeover bid was faltering, with investors and the public rallying behind Pinnacle's promise of ethical reform. That evening, as Jacob prepared for the gala, he felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The battle wasn't over. He knew Apex and others like them wouldn't give up easily, but for the first time, he truly believed that change was possible. As he adjusted his bow tie one last time, a knock on the door announced Olivia's arrival. She entered, resplendent in a shimmering gown, her eyes meeting his in the mirror. "Ready to change the world, Mr. Miller?" she asked with a smile. Jacob turned to her, taking her hand in his. "As long as you're by my side, Ms. Martinez, I'm ready for anything." Together, they stepped out into the New York night, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The humble data entry clerk had found his voice, and the corporate world would never be the same again. As they drove towards the gala venue, the glittering lights of the city seemed to pulse with possibility. Little did they know that this night would mark not just a new chapter for Pinnacle Industries, but the beginning of a revolution in corporate America, one that would challenge the very foundations of power, greed, and corruption. The stage was set for an unforgettable evening, and Jacob Miller, once invisible, was now the man everyone was watching. The real test of his leadership was about to begin, and the eyes of the nation were upon him. The limousine glided to a stop in front of the Grand Palatial Hotel, its gleaming facade a testament to opulence and excess. As the door opened, camera flashes erupted like a supernova, momentarily blinding Jacob as he stepped out onto the red carpet. He blinked, overwhelmed by the spectacle, before turning to offer his hand to Olivia. She emerged from the car with grace, her emerald gown shimmering under the bright lights. As she took Jacob's arm, he felt a surge of confidence. With Olivia by his side, he could face anything. "Mr. Miller! Mr. Miller!" The shouts of reporters filled the air. "How do you respond to Apex's allegations? Is it true that you're planning to completely overhaul Pinnacle's corporate structure? Ms. Martinez, are the rumors of a romantic involvement between you and Mr. Miller true?" Jacob and Olivia exchanged a brief, startled glance at the last question before composing themselves. They had prepared for this, knowing that every word, every gesture would be scrutinized. "Tonight isn't about rumors or allegations," Jacob said, his voice clear and steady. "It's about charting a new course for Pinnacle Industries and for corporate America as a whole. We're here to show that ethics and profitability aren't mutually exclusive." With that, they made their way into the hotel, leaving a wake of murmurs and speculation behind them. The ballroom was a sea of glittering gowns and crisp tuxedos, the air thick with perfume and ambition. As Jacob and Olivia entered, a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to the unlikely pair, the former data entry clerk and the HR manager who had shaken the foundations of Wall Street. From across the room, Amanda caught Jacob's eye, giving him a subtle nod. She was resplendent in a sleek black gown, a notepad discreetly tucked into her clutch. Even here, she was working, gathering intel and taking the pulse of the room. As Jacob and Olivia made their way through the crowd, they were stopped every few steps by well-wishers, skeptics, and the simply curious. Jacob found himself shaking hands with CEOs whose names he had only seen in newspapers, fielding questions from board members of rival companies, and reassuring nervous Pinnacle employees. Suddenly, a familiar face appeared before them. Sarah Blackwood, looking elegant in a modest blue gown, approached with a nervous smile. "Mr. Miller, Ms. Martinez," she greeted them. "I just wanted to thank you again for this opportunity. I'm ready to speak whenever you think it's best." Olivia squeezed the young woman's hand encouragingly. "You're going to do great, Sarah. Just speak from your heart." As Sarah nodded and moved away, Jacob leaned in close to Olivia. "Do you really think this will work? There's still so much that could go wrong." Olivia's eyes met his, filled with warmth and determination. "We've come this far, Jacob. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Their moment was interrupted by the sharp tap of a spoon against glass. The crowd fell silent as Reginald Thornton, chairman of Pinnacle's board of directors, took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thornton's voice boomed through the ballroom, "welcome to Pinnacle Industries' annual charity gala. As you all know, this year's event is somewhat different from our usual affair." A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the crowd. Recent events have shaken not just Pinnacle, but the very foundations of corporate America. Tonight, we have a chance to chart a new course. And to help us navigate these turbulent waters, I'd like to introduce the man who has become the face of our company's transformation. Please welcome Mr. Jacob Miller. The applause was polite but tentative as Jacob made his way to the stage. As he looked out over the sea of faces, some curious, some skeptical, some openly hostile, he felt a moment of panic. What was he doing here? He was just a data entry clerk, not a CEO or a motivational speaker. But then his eyes found Olivia in the crowd. She gave him a small, encouraging nod, and suddenly, Jacob felt the fear melt away. He wasn't just speaking for himself anymore. He was speaking for every overlooked worker, every whistleblower who had been silenced, every person who had ever felt powerless in the face of corporate greed. "Good evening," Jacob began, his voice stronger than he expected. "A few months ago, I stood in this very hotel, pressed against the wall during the staff briefing for last year's gala. I was part of the catering staff, you see. Invisible. Unimportant." A murmur ran through the crowd. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today, addressing you as a leader of Pinnacle Industries. But my journey from that wall to this podium is proof that change is possible. That integrity and hard work can triumph over corruption and greed." As Jacob continued his speech, outlining his vision for a more ethical, transparent Pinnacle, he could see the crowd becoming more engaged. Even the skeptics were leaning in, listening intently. "But this isn't just about Pinnacle," Jacob said, his voice rising with passion. "This is about reshaping the very nature of corporate America. It's about proving that companies can be profitable and ethical. That we can value our workers as much as our shareholders. That kindness and compassion have a place in the boardroom." Just as Jacob was building to his crescendo, a commotion at the back of the ballroom caught everyone's attention. Maxwell Sterling, CEO of Apex Corporation, stormed in, his face red with fury. "This is all a lie!" Sterling shouted, pushing his way through the stunned crowd. "Miller is a fraud. I have proof that he's been manipulating company records, that this whole whistleblower act is just a ploy for power." The room erupted into chaos. Guests began murmuring loudly, some backing away from Jacob as if he were suddenly toxic. Olivia started to move towards the stage, but Amanda held her back, whispering urgently in her ear. Jacob felt the panic rising in his chest. This was it, the moment he had feared. Everything he had worked for was about to come crashing down. But then, he remembered something his father had told him long ago. The truth, son, is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose, and it will defend itself. Taking a deep breath, Jacob held up his hands, calling for quiet. To his surprise, the room gradually fell silent. "Mr. Sterling," Jacob said, his voice calm and clear, "I welcome any investigation into my actions or Pinnacle's records. In fact, I insist on it. Let's have a full, independent audit of both Pinnacle and Apex. Let's see which company truly has nothing to hide." Sterling's face paled, his bluster faltering. It was clear he hadn't expected this level of transparency. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the crowd. "I can vouch for Mr. Miller's integrity." Sarah Blackwood stepped forward, her head held high. "My father's actions brought this company to its knees, but Jacob Miller's honesty and compassion are what's bringing it back to life. If Pinnacle is the future of ethical business, then Apex is everything we should leave behind." The room fell silent, all eyes darting between Jacob, Sterling, and Sarah. It was a moment balanced on a knife's edge, with the future of both companies hanging in the balance. Then, from the back of the room, a slow clap began. It was Amanda, a fierce grin on her face. Olivia joined in, then Sarah. Soon, the entire ballroom was filled with applause, growing louder and more enthusiastic by the second. Sterling, realizing he had lost this battle, retreated towards the exit, his face a mask of barely contained rage. As he reached the door, he turned back to Jacob, his eyes cold. "This isn't over, Miller," he snarled. "You have no idea what you're up against." As Sterling disappeared into the night, Jacob felt a mix of elation and trepidation. He had won this round, but he knew the war was far from over. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, interviews, and intense discussions about the future of Pinnacle. As the last guests began to trickle out in the early hours of the morning, Jacob found himself on the balcony, looking out over the twinkling lights of New York City. Olivia joined him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "You did it, Jacob," she said softly. "You really did it." Jacob turned to her, his eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We did it," he corrected her. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Olivia." Their eyes met, and in that moment, all the unspoken feelings between them seemed to crystallize. Slowly, they leaned towards each other, their lips meeting in a soft, tender kiss. As they parted, both slightly breathless, Jacob couldn't help but chuckle. "I guess that answers the reporter's question about our romantic involvement. Olivia laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. "I suppose it does. So, what now, Mr. Miller? Ready to change the world?" Jacob wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "As long as you're by my side, Ms. Martinez, I'm ready for anything." As they stood there, bathed in the soft glow of the city lights, neither of them could have imagined the challenges that lay ahead. For across town, in the opulent offices of Apex Corporation, Maxwell Sterling was already plotting his revenge. The battle for the soul of corporate America had only just begun, and Jacob Miller, the humble data entry clerk turned corporate crusader, was now at the Very heart of the storm. The dawn broke over New York City, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. For Jacob and Olivia, it marked not just the beginning of a new day, but the dawn of a new era for Pinnacle, for themselves, and potentially for the entire corporate world. As they left the hotel, hand in hand, they knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. But with their shared vision, their unwavering integrity, and their newfound love, they were ready to face whatever came their way. The humble workers' triumph had sent shockwaves through Wall Street, and the ripples of change were only beginning to spread. The stage was set for a battle that would test not just Jacob's leadership, but the very foundations of corporate America. And as the city awakened to a new day, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The weeks following the gala were a whirlwind of activity for Jacob and Olivia. The story of Pinnacle's transformation and Jacob's rise from humble clerk to corporate reformer had captured the nation's imagination. News outlets clamored for interviews, business schools requested lectures, and workers across the country looked to Pinnacle as a beacon of hope in an often ruthless corporate landscape. One crisp autumn morning, Jacob stood at the window of his new corner office, gazing out at the New York skyline. The view still took his breath away, a constant reminder of how far he had come. But with that ascent came a weight of responsibility that sometimes threatened to overwhelm him. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his reverie. Olivia entered, a stack of papers in her arms and a worried crease between her brows. "Jacob," she said, her voice tinged with concern, "we need to talk." He turned to her, immediately alert. In the weeks since their kiss on the balcony, their relationship had blossomed, but they had agreed to keep things professional at work. The serious look on Olivia's face told him this wasn't a personal matter. "What's wrong?" he asked, gesturing for her to sit. Olivia spread the papers on his desk. "I've been going over the employee satisfaction surveys from our satellite offices. The results, well, they're not what we hoped for." Jacob leaned in, scanning the documents. His heart sank as he took in the data. While morale had improved dramatically at Pinnacle's headquarters, their regional offices were still struggling with many of the same issues that had plagued the company before. "How is this possible?" Jacob muttered, more to himself than to Olivia. "We've implemented new policies, increased transparency, raised wages." Olivia sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It seems our message isn't filtering down as effectively as we thought. There's still a lot of mistrust, especially in the offices that had closer ties to Ethan Blackwood's old regime." Jacob slumped in his chair, the weight of their task settling heavily on his shoulders. "We can't claim to be changing corporate culture if we can't even change our own company," he said softly. Olivia reached across the desk, taking his hand in hers. "Hey," she said gently, "we always knew this wouldn't be easy. But we're making progress. We just need to work harder to ensure our reforms reach every level of the company." Jacob nodded, squeezing her hand gratefully. "You're right. We need to visit these offices in person, show them that the changes are real." Just then, Jacob's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his brow furrowing. "It's Amanda," he said. "She says it's urgent." Minutes later, Amanda burst into the office, her face flushed with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," she said, brandishing her tablet. "I've got a source inside Apex. They're planning something big, and it's not just aimed at Pinnacle." Jacob and Olivia leaned in as Amanda pulled up a series of confidential memos and emails. As they read through the documents, their eyes widened in shock. "They're planning a series of hostile takeovers," Jacob whispered. "Not just us, but half a dozen other companies known for their ethical practices." Olivia's grip on Jacob's hand tightened. It's not just about business for them anymore. They're trying to stamp out the entire movement towards corporate reform. Amanda nodded grimly. Exactly. Maxwell Sterling sees what's happening at Pinnacle as a threat to his entire way of doing business. He's gathering allies, planning to nip this ethical business trend in the bud before it can spread further. Jacob stood up, pacing the room as his mind raced. We need to warn the other companies, find a way to protect them. It's not that simple, Amanda cautioned. My source took a huge risk getting this information to me. If we act too openly, Sterling will know there's a leak in his organization. Olivia's eyes lit up with an idea. What if we don't act openly? Jacob, remember that ethics conference you were invited to speak at next month? All of these companies will be there. We could use it as cover to meet with their CEOs, warn them discreetly. Jacob nodded slowly, a plan beginning to form in his mind. That could work. But we'll need to be careful. Sterling's bound to have eyes and ears at the conference. As they began to strategize, a new fire was lit within Jacob. This was no longer just about saving Pinnacle, it was about protecting a vision for a more ethical corporate America. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. Jacob and Olivia traveled to Pinnacle's regional offices, working tirelessly to address concerns and rebuild trust. At the same time, they worked with Amanda to carefully craft their strategy for the upcoming conference. The night before they were due to leave for Chicago, where the conference was being held, Jacob found himself once again standing at the window of his office, the city lights twinkling below. Olivia joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked softly. Jacob turned to her, his eyes filled with a mix of determination and vulnerability. "I'm scared, Olivia," he admitted. "When I started this, I was just trying to do the right thing for Pinnacle. Now it feels like the fate of the entire corporate world is resting on our shoulders." Olivia reached up, gently cupping his cheek. "You're not alone in this, Jacob. We're in it together, remember? And we're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. We're fighting for every worker who's ever felt powerless, every whistleblower who's been silenced, every company that's tried to do the right thing and been punished for it." Jacob leaned into her touch, drawing strength from her words and her presence. "You're right," he said, his resolve strengthening. "Whatever Sterling and Apex throw at us, we'll face it together." As they shared a tender kiss, neither of them could have imagined the challenges that awaited them in Chicago. For across the country, in a luxurious penthouse suite, Maxwell Sterling was putting the finishing touches on his own plans for the conference. "Everything is in place, sir," his assistant reported. "Our operatives are ready to move at your command." Sterling smiled coldly, swirling the scotch in his glass as he looked out over the Chicago skyline. "Excellent. It's time we showed Mr. Miller and his band of do-gooders how the real world works. By the time this conference is over, the name Jacob Miller will be synonymous with corporate fraud." As the first light of dawn broke over New York City, Jacob and Olivia boarded their flight to Chicago, blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing. The ethics conference was about to become a battlefield, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The plane touched down in Chicago under leaden skies, the atmosphere as heavy and foreboding as Jacob's thoughts. As they made their way through the crowded airport, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Relax," Olivia whispered, sensing his tension. "We're just being paranoid." But as they approached the taxi stand, a sleek black car pulled up alongside them. The window rolled down, revealing Amanda's face. "Get in," she said urgently. "We've got a problem." Once inside the car, Amanda handed them each a tablet. "This just broke on social media," she said grimly. "It's already going viral." Jacob and Olivia looked down at the screens, their hearts sinking. There, in high-resolution detail, was a photo of them kissing on the balcony of the Grand Palatial Hotel the night of the gala. The headline above it screamed, "Corporate Reform or Romantic Ruse?" The secret affair behind Pinnacle's ethical makeover. How? Jacob began, but Amanda cut him off. "It gets worse," she said, swiping to the next screen. "There's a whole dossier. Emails, hotel receipts, surveillance photos. They're painting your relationship as a long-standing affair, implying that Olivia helped you stage the whole whistleblower incident to seize control of the company." Olivia's face had gone pale. "But that's ridiculous. We only got together after the gala. And I was barely involved in the initial whistleblowing." Amanda nodded sympathetically. "I know. But they've twisted the timeline, cherry-picked data. To the casual observer, it looks damning." Jacob slumped in his seat, the weight of this new attack crushing down on him. "This has Sterling written all over it," he muttered. "He's trying to discredit us before we can warn the other companies." As the car wove through Chicago's busy streets, the three of them frantically worked to craft a response. But with every passing minute, the story grew, fed by an army of bots and aided by Sterling's media connections. By the time they reached the hotel where the conference was being held, they were greeted by a mob of reporters shouting questions. "Mr. Miller, did you fake the Pinnacle scandal to cover up your affair? Ms. Martinez, how long have you been helping Mr. Miller manipulate company records? Is this entire corporate ethics movement just a front for personal gain?" Jacob and Olivia pushed through the crowd, their faces grim, refusing to comment. As the hotel doors closed behind them, shutting out the cacophony, they found themselves face to face with Maxwell Sterling. Well, Sterling said, a triumphant smirk on his face. "If it isn't the lovebirds themselves. Lovely day for a scandal, isn't it?" Jacob stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "You won't get away with this, Sterling. The truth will come out." Sterling's smirk widened. "Oh, I think I already have, Mr. Miller. By the time this conference is over, you'll be lucky if you can get a job flipping burgers, let alone leading a corporate reform movement." As Sterling sauntered away, Jacob turned to Olivia and Amanda, his face set with determination. "We need a new plan. Now." The three of them huddled in a corner of the lobby, speaking in hushed tones. They had come to warn other companies about Apex's plans, but now they found themselves fighting for their own survival. "We need to get ahead of this story," Amanda said. "A press conference, as soon as possible. We lay out the true timeline, provide evidence of Sterling's manipulation." Olivia nodded. "I'll reach out to Sarah Blackwood. Her testimony about Jacob's character could be crucial. And I'll try to contact the CEOs we came to warn," Jacob added. "If we can get them on our side, present a united front." Their planning was interrupted by the arrival of Reginald Thornton, chairman of Pinnacle's board of directors. His face was grave as he approached them. "Jacob, Olivia," he said, his voice heavy. "The board is calling an emergency meeting. They're considering asking for your resignations." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as the full impact of Sterling's attack hit home. Everything they had worked for, everything they had built, was on the verge of crumbling. But as Jacob looked at Olivia, saw the fire in her eyes, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had come too far, fought too hard, to give up now. "Tell the board we'll address their concerns," Jacob said firmly. "But first, we have a press conference to arrange." As they set off to prepare for the biggest fight of their lives, Jacob couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. They had overcome seemingly insurmountable odds before. With truth on their side and each other to lean on, perhaps they could do it again. Little did they know that across the hotel, in a room filled with monitors and tech equipment, Maxwell Sterling was watching their every move. His plan was unfolding perfectly, but he knew better than to underestimate Jacob Miller. The real battle was just beginning, and Sterling was determined to emerge victorious, no matter the cost. As the storm clouds gathered over Chicago, the stage was set for a showdown that would determine not just the fate of Pinnacle Industries, but the future of corporate ethics in America. The humble data entry clerk who had dared to challenge the status quo was about to face his greatest test yet. The conference room buzzed with tension as Jacob, Olivia, and Amanda huddled around a laptop, frantically preparing for the press conference. Outside, the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke, rain lashing against the windows as if nature itself was mirroring their turmoil. "We've got confirmation from Sarah Blackwood," Olivia announced, looking up from her phone. "She's on her way. Her testimony could be crucial in establishing your character, Jacob." Jacob nodded, his face etched with determination. "Good. What about the other CEOs?" Amanda grimaced. "It's not looking great. Most of them are keeping their distance, afraid of being tainted by association. But I've got a few who are willing to speak on your behalf, albeit anonymously for now." A knock at the door made them all jump. Reginald Thornton entered, his face grave. "The board is assembled," he said. "They're expecting you to address them before the press conference." Jacob stood, straightening his tie. He caught sight of his reflection in the window. Gone was the timid data entry clerk. In his place stood a man who had faced down corporate giants and exposed corruption at the highest levels. He wouldn't be cowed now. "Let's do this," he said, his voice steady. As they made their way to the boardroom, Olivia slipped her hand into Jacob's, giving it a reassuring squeeze. No words were needed, her touch alone conveyed all the support and love he needed. The boardroom fell silent as they entered. The faces around the table were a mix of concern, disappointment, and in some cases, barely concealed anger. Jacob took a deep breath and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I know you've all seen the allegations against Ms. Martinez and myself. I'm here to tell you, unequivocally, that they are false. These accusations are a deliberate attempt by Maxwell Sterling and Apex Corporation to discredit not just us, but the entire movement towards ethical corporate reform that Pinnacle now represents." He paused, looking each board member in the eye. "I understand your concern. The optics of this situation are challenging, to say the least. But I ask you to consider not just the past few months, but the years I've dedicated to this company. My record speaks for itself. I've never sought personal gain or power. Everything I've done has been for the betterment of Pinnacle and its employees." Olivia stepped forward. "As for our relationship, yes, it's true that Jacob and I are together. But this happened after the whistleblowing, after the reforms were already in motion. We've kept things professional at work, and our personal relationship has never influenced our decision-making for the company." The room was silent for a moment before an elderly board member spoke up. "And what of the evidence Sterling has presented? The emails, the hotel receipts?" Jacob's jaw tightened. "Fabricated or manipulated? We have IT experts working as we speak to prove the tampering. But more importantly, we have witnesses who can testify to the true timeline of events." Just then, the door burst open, and Sarah Blackwood rushed in, slightly out of breath. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said. "But I couldn't let you face this alone." Sarah turned to the board, her voice clear and determined. "My father's actions nearly destroyed this company. But Jacob Miller, a man I once viewed as an enemy, showed me the true meaning of integrity and second chances. Everything he's done has been to make Pinnacle a better, more ethical company. If you turn your backs on him now, you're not just losing a great leader, you're betraying everything this company now stands for." Her impassioned speech seemed to shift the mood in the room. Jacob could see doubt and uncertainty replacing the anger on many faces. Reginald Thornton cleared his throat. I think I speak for the board when I say we need time to process all of this. Go ahead with your press conference, Mr. Miller. We'll withhold judgment until we have all the facts. As they left the boardroom, Jacob felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't a full victory, but it was a start. The next hour was a whirlwind of activity as they finalized preparations for the press conference. Just as they were about to head to the hotel's main ballroom, Amanda's phone buzzed. Her eyes widened as she read the message. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "My source inside Apex just sent me something big. Really big." Jacob and Olivia leaned in as Amanda pulled up a series of documents on her tablet. As they read, their expressions shifted from shock to grim determination. "This is it," Jacob said softly. "This is the smoking gun we need." Olivia nodded, a fierce light in her eyes. Sterling's not just trying to take over ethical companies. He's been actively sabotaging them, manipulating stock prices, planting false stories. "And that's not all," Amanda added. "There's evidence here of massive environmental violations, worker exploitation in overseas factories, even possible connections to organized crime." Jacob straightened up, a new energy coursing through him. "We need to get this to the authorities. But first..." The press conference, Olivia finished for him. As they entered the ballroom, they were met with a wall of camera flashes and shouted questions. Jacob took his place at the podium, Olivia and Sarah flanking him on either side. He could see Maxwell Sterling in the back of the room, a smug smile on his face. Jacob cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I know many of you are here expecting me to defend myself against the allegations that have been circulating. And I will address those. But first, I want to talk about something much bigger than me, or Pinnacle, or even Apex Corporation." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "We stand at a crossroads in corporate America. For too long, we've accepted a culture of greed, exploitation, and moral bankruptcy as the cost of doing business. We've allowed men like Maxwell Sterling to accumulate vast wealth and power at the expense of workers, communities, and the very planet we live on." Sterling's smile had faded, replaced by a look of growing unease. "Today, I'm not just here to clear my name. I'm here to issue a call to action. To every worker who's ever felt powerless, to every executive with a conscience, to every shareholder who wants their investments to reflect their values, it's time to take a stand." Jacob gestured to Amanda, who began distributing flash drives to the assembled journalists. "On these drives, you'll find irrefutable evidence of corporate malfeasance on a scale that will shock even the most cynical among you. Apex Corporation, under the leadership of Maxwell Sterling, has been engaged in a systematic campaign of sabotage, manipulation, and criminal activity aimed at destroying any company that dares to prioritize ethics over pure profit." The room erupted in chaos as journalists began accessing the files. Sterling, his face now ashen, started pushing his way towards the exit. But Jacob wasn't finished. "As for the allegations against Ms. Martinez and myself, they are categorically false. We have proof that the so-called evidence was fabricated. But more importantly, we have something Mr. Sterling and his allies will never understand: integrity." He turned to Olivia, taking her hand. "Yes, Olivia and I are in a relationship. It began after the reforms at Pinnacle were already underway. We've kept things professional at work, and our personal feelings have never compromised our commitment to this company or its employees." Sarah stepped forward. "I can attest to Mr. Miller's character. He showed compassion and integrity even when dealing with the family of the man who had humiliated him. Everything he's done has been in service of making Pinnacle, and by extension, the entire corporate world, more ethical and humane. As the press conference continued, with Jacob, Olivia, and Sarah fielding questions and presenting their evidence, a commotion broke out at the back of the room. Federal agents were leading a handcuffed Maxwell Sterling away, the once mighty CEO now looking small and defeated. Hours later, as the dust began to settle, Jacob found himself back in his hotel room, slumped on the edge of the bed. The adrenaline of the day was wearing off, leaving him feeling drained but cautiously optimistic. A soft knock at the door roused him. He opened it to find Olivia, her eyes shining with a mix of exhaustion and pride. "We did it," she said softly, stepping into his arms. Jacob held her close, burying his face in her hair. "We did," he murmured. "But it's not over yet, is it?" Olivia pulled back, cupping his face in her hands. "No, it's not. But whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace, both knew that this was just the beginning. The path ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and setbacks. But they had each other, and they had a vision for a better, more ethical corporate world. Outside, the storm had finally passed. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the Chicago skyline in hues of gold and pink, it seemed to herald the dawn of a new era, not just for Jacob and Olivia, or for Pinnacle Industries, but for the entire landscape of American business. The humble data entry clerk who had dared to stand up to corporate giants had not only triumphed but had ignited a movement that would reshape the very foundations of corporate America. And as Jacob and Olivia looked out at the new day breaking over the city, they knew that their greatest challenges and their greatest opportunities to make a difference still lay ahead. The months following the dramatic events in Chicago were a whirlwind of activity for Jacob and Olivia. The exposure of Apex Corporation's misdeeds had sent shockwaves through the business world, triggering a series of investigations, reforms, and soul-searching across corporate America. Pinnacle Industries, once teetering on the brink of ethical and financial ruin, had emerged as a beacon of hope and a model for corporate reform. Under Jacob and Olivia's leadership, the company had not only weathered the storm but was thriving, its stock prices soaring as investors and customers alike flocked to support their vision of ethical business practices. On a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after the fateful gala that had changed everything, Jacob stood at the window of his office, looking out over the New York skyline. The view still took his breath away, but now it filled him with a sense of purpose rather than intimidation. A knock at the door pulled him from his reverie. Olivia entered, a warm smile on her face and a thick folder in her hands. "Ready for the board meeting?" she asked, crossing the room to stand beside him. Jacob nodded, taking a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be. This is it, isn't it? The moment we've been working towards all year." Olivia squeezed his hand reassuringly. "It is. And you're going to do great." As they made their way to the boardroom, Jacob couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. The once oppressive hallways of Pinnacle now buzzed with energy and purpose. Employees smiled and greeted them warmly, a far cry from the fearful, downtrodden workforce of Ethan Blackwood's era. The boardroom fell silent as Jacob and Olivia entered. Reginald Thornton, still serving as chairman, nodded to them respectfully. "Mr. Miller, Ms. Martinez, the floor is yours." Jacob stepped forward, his voice clear and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, 1 year ago, we stood on the brink of disaster. Today, I'm proud to say that Pinnacle Industries is not just surviving, but leading the way in corporate ethics and responsibility." He gestured to Olivia, who began distributing reports to the board members. "What you have before you is our proposal for the Pinnacle Foundation for Corporate Ethics. This isn't just another corporate charity. This is our commitment to fundamentally changing the way business is done in America and around the world." As Jacob and Olivia laid out their vision, a foundation that would provide resources and support for whistleblowers, fund research into ethical business practices, and offer education and training for the next generation of corporate leaders, the room buzzed with excitement. But that's not all, Jacob continued, a hint of emotion creeping into his voice. We're also proposing a radical restructuring of Pinnacle itself. Employee profit sharing, increased transparency in decision-making, and a cap on executive pay relative to the lowest paid workers. He paused, looking each board member in the eye. I know what you're thinking. That this is idealistic, maybe even naive. That it will hurt our bottom line. But I'm here to tell you that ethical business isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business. Our profits are up, our employee satisfaction is at an all-time high, and we're attracting top talent from across the industry. As the presentation concluded, the room erupted in applause. Even the most skeptical board members seemed won over by Jacob and Olivia's passion and the undeniable results of their leadership. Reginald Thornton stood, a broad smile on his face. I think I speak for the entire board when I say that we are not just impressed, but inspired. The proposals are approved. Pinnacle will continue to lead the way in corporate ethics. As they left the boardroom, Jacob felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They had done it. The vision that had started with one act of whistleblowing was now becoming a reality on a scale he had never imagined. Later that evening, as the sun set over New York City, Jacob found himself back on the rooftop garden where he had once shared a moment of vulnerability with Olivia. But this time, he wasn't alone. Olivia stood beside him, her hand intertwined with his. Sarah Blackwood was there too, now heading up Pinnacle's new youth outreach program. Amanda, who had parlayed her reporting on the Apex scandal into a Pulitzer Prize, chatted animatedly with a group of Pinnacle employees. And in a corner, looking slightly out of place but undeniably proud, stood Ethan Blackwood. After serving a brief prison sentence, he had embraced the opportunity for redemption offered by Jacob, working tirelessly to make amends and support Pinnacle's new direction. As Jacob looked around at the gathering, a mix of old friends and new allies, all united in their commitment to changing the corporate world for the better, he felt a swell of emotion in his chest. Olivia noticed his momentary distraction and leaned in close. "Penny for your thoughts?" she whispered. Jacob smiled, pulling her closer. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. How many lives we've touched. A year ago, I was just a data entry clerk trying to do the right thing. And now you're changing the world," Olivia finished for him, her eyes shining with pride and love. Jacob shook his head, his voice humble but firm. "No, we're changing the world. All of us, together." As if on cue, Reginald Thornton called for everyone's attention, raising his glass in a toast. To Jacob and Olivia, he began, who showed us that one person, or in this case, two, really can make a difference. And to all of you, who had the courage to believe in a better way of doing business. To Pinnacle, and to the future of corporate ethics. The rooftop erupted in cheers and applause. As Jacob looked out over the city, the lights twinkling like stars in the gathering dusk, he felt a profound sense of purpose and hope. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and those who would resist change. But looking at the faces around him, Olivia, Sarah, Amanda, even Ethan, Jacob knew that they had started something that couldn't be stopped. The humble data entry clerk who had dared to stand up to corporate giants hadn't just triumphed over adversity. He had ignited a movement, a fundamental shift in the way people thought about business and ethics. As the celebration continued around them, Jacob pulled Olivia close, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Ready to change the world?" he whispered, echoing the words she had spoken to him so long ago. Olivia's eyes sparkled as she looked up at him. "With you? Always." And there, under the starry New York sky, surrounded by friends and allies, Jacob and Olivia stood at the threshold of a new era. An era where integrity trumped greed, where corporations served not just shareholders but society as a whole, and where even the humblest worker could rise up and make a difference. The story of Jacob Miller and Olivia Martinez, the tale of the humble worker's triumph, would be told for generations to come. Not just as a heartwarming tale of love and perseverance, but as a turning point in corporate history, a moment when the tides began to shift towards a more ethical, compassionate way of doing business. As the night wore on and the city hummed with life below, Jacob and Olivia remained on the rooftop, hand in hand, their eyes fixed on the horizon. They had fought for this future, sacrificed for it, and now they stood ready to lead the way into a new dawn for corporate America. The humble worker had not just triumphed, he had transformed the very world he once felt powerless within. And as Jacob Miller looked to the future, he knew that this was not the end of his story, but merely the beginning of a greater one, a story of ethical business practices spreading across the globe, changing lives and shaping a better world for all.